I am Rachel Schnabel. I'm with Barton and LaJudas. We are the engineering consulting firm that's been hired by the town of Lewisboro to conduct this engineering study of Lake Waccabuc. With me, we also have Don Fletcher and Dylan Curran, thank you. And then virtually, we also have Dave Haney, who is in charge of the environmental side of this project. Oh, yes. Ron Tettleman, he's not currently with us right now, but he also works with Barton and LaJudas. He's part of this project. And for those of you who aren't familiar with him, he lives on Oskaleta Road, and he is part of the study area. So he's a great connection with the community. So if you ever see Ron, out on his boat on the lake or anything, feel free to stop him and ask questions. He's not here, so I can volunteer him all I want.
Rachel, looks like
So
Ron is on
virtually.
On virtually, so be careful.
Okay, thank you for the warning, Dave. So for those attending virtually, the chat feature of Zoom has been turned off, but we do have a Q&A button. So if you have any questions, you can type them in at any point in time during the presentation. And then at the end, we will first take questions from the people who are here physically, and then we will go through all of the questions that have been submitted from our virtual participants. Okay, so for this meeting, we want to go over a little background about the study, how we went about identifying sources of nutrient pollution to Lake Waccabuc, some of the wastewater management solutions that we've looked at, the funding that we're going to try to get for these solutions, and then what comes next after this study. So the town of Lewisboro obtained grant money for 3 lake studies: Lake Waccabuc, Lake Truesdale, and Lake Kitchewan. So this is focused on Lake Waccabuc. The studies are funded through the East of Hudson Community Wastewater Planning Assistant Grant Program. I swear they try to make these names as long as possible. But that's through DEP. And that's because this is part of the DEP unfiltered watershed. So they have a vested interest in this. So the study area, for those of you who haven't seen the map yet, it's the red outline. So it covers a pretty large area. This is the watershed of Lake Waccabuc, but it does exclude Lake Waccabuc and Lake Oskaleta, even though they are hydraulically connected. The study is only being funded for just this area. With that in mind, we are keeping in mind that Lake Waccabuc and Oskaleta are connected, and we are trying to look into what that might mean. And we'll touch base on that a little bit further into the presentation. Okay, so I'm going to hand it off to Dave again. He's in charge of the environmental aspect of this project.
Thanks, Rachel, and good evening, everybody. Thank you again for coming out or joining virtually. Rachel, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent.
Can everybody in the back hear Dave okay? Okay.
All right. So I'm going to just spend a little bit of time talking about some of the water quality issues within the lake, some of the work that we're doing to further analyze and assess the water quality, and some of the trends that we've observed over the years based on the historical data. So oftentimes with freshwater lakes, we talk about eutrophication, and eutrophication is a natural process. And what it really refers to is the productivity of a lake. So if you look down at the bottom of this slide, you can see some different classifications, and Lake Waccabuc is classified as a mesotrophic lake. So what that means is it has a moderate level of activity, productivity, and we see this based on the weed growth, the algae growth within the lake. And water quality with a mesotrophic lake is typically considered a fair condition. And as I mentioned, eutrophication is a natural process. And what we really want to do is make sure that our activities aren't accelerating the natural eutrophication of a lake. So ways that we can accelerate it are by changes in land use, nutrients running off the watershed in the form of stormwater runoff, and failing septic systems, which is of course, a big part of this, the main part of this study. So the main pollutant of concern, if you will, is considered phosphorus. And phosphorus is a nutrient. And too much phosphorus, too much nutrients into the lake is not a good thing. Too much phosphorus can cause increased algae growth, increase the productivity of the lake, and really create some negative water quality issues. So primary focus of this study is looking at the phosphorus loadings into the lake. So we're really fortunate to have a real great background history of water quality testing. This testing has been done through the CSLAP program, which is the Citizen State Lake Assessment Program. And it's a group of volunteers. I know some are in the room tonight or joining virtually that have volunteered their time to go into the watershed, into the lake, collect samples that are submitted to the lab, collect field parameters, and really build a background data set so we can evaluate how the lake is trending. And what we've observed over the last few years, especially with the data that was collected in 2020, is we're really seeing increase in levels of phosphorus. Last year, the phosphorus levels in the lake were about 2 times greater than the state recommended limit. And again, phosphorus is the primary nutrient that we're concerned with. So if you look at the chart on the right-hand side of the slide here, you can see in average years, the lake has been classified mesotrophic, again, fair water quality. But based on recent data, the lake is trending towards a eutrophic condition. In a eutrophic condition, again, it's going to lead to more weeds, more algae growth, and decreased water quality. And really the focus of this study is to try to slow the progression towards the eutrophic condition. So with increased levels of nutrients and phosphorus, they can have detrimental effects for the fishermen in the crowd. We have depletion of dissolved oxygen that can result in fish kills, can affect the fisheries. We'll have increased instances of harmful algae blooms. In some cases, the harmful algae blooms can release toxins, which are harmful. It can impair the drinking water supply for the lake and the reservoirs. It can also make the lake more susceptible to invasive species. We are seeing more invasive species, different types of plants that are starting to populate the lake. And of course, it can limit the recreational opportunities. We all want to keep the lake clean for fishing, boating, swimming, and all the things that we enjoy. So this is a shot, as I mentioned, the CSLAP program's been going since the mid 80s. There's a lot of background data, but this study also included collection of a lot of samples as well. We were out in the field on July 7th and 8th, collecting a number of samples. All these stars within the lake illustrate the different locations where we took samples from. There's a shot of us. Unfortunately, I'm not one of the deckhands on the boat on that beautiful day sampling, but we were out in the field taking different samples that we sent off to the lab. And we were sampling to really kind of distinguish where the potential nutrients could be coming from. So, we're looking again, phosphorus, nitrogen, and these are compounds that can be washing off the watershed from the stormwater runoff. We also looked at indicators for potential failing septic systems. So we were sampling for fecal coliform, ammonia, boron, color, and we're really trying to get a good handle on the distinction of where are the impairments coming from? Are they driven from failing septic systems? Are they driven from other land uses within the watershed? So unfortunately, we are really hoping to have this data to share with everybody tonight. We're still waiting on the final results from the lab. We expect them within the next few days, and they will be incorporated into the draft report, and we'll be presenting that data at future meetings as well. Just a quick update on some of the CSLAP results and some of the trends that we're seeing. They conducted their fourth sampling session recently in July. As you're all aware, July has been very wet, much more rainfall than normal. And with the heavier rainfalls brings the potential to wash the pollutants, nutrients off the surface and down into the lake. So, you know, we were kind of expecting some of these results based on how wet July has been. But as you're all aware, you know, we've seen lake-wide presence of blue-green algae, lake-wide presence of green algae as well. I would just like to note that the algae, especially the blue-green algae, has the potential to produce toxins, the harmful toxins. We did screening as part of our field sampling program for toxins. We did not find any high elevated levels of toxins within the lake during our field screening. We're still waiting on our lab results to come in, and we'll have more to share once we get those results.
So for the engineering study, it's really been broken down into 4 parts that we're doing or have done. So we're identifying the sources of nutrients. We've determined the potential solutions. We're in the process of evaluating the cost of the solutions and identifying funding sources. So with identifying the sources of nutrient pollution, the first thing we did was we tried to get all available data that we could. We talked to Westchester County Department of Health. We talked to their GIS department to get data layers for, surface contours. We got data from the USDA on soils, depth to groundwater, depth to bedrock, that sort of background information. In the case of the soil data, that's more of a big picture data. Obviously, on a case-by-case basis for each site, it's going to vary a little bit. So that's something to keep in mind. But for the purposes of this study, we looked at the data that we had available to us. And we used that data to look at, to what extent are septic systems contributing nutrient pollution to Lake Waccabuc? And, which septic systems are likely the contributors? And what impact would providing sewer have to the lake in terms of a positive impact? And Dave, I know that's one thing that we hadn't really talked about touching on, but I think it's certainly important to highlight is if we can fix the cause of the problem for nutrient pollution, or should I say the main cause, or a significant cause, because Lake Waccabuc is a relatively shallow water body, we do anticipate that it would be able to bounce back fairly quickly. And Dave, I don't know if you want to speak to that for a second.
Sure. So one of the factors we look at is the retention time of the water within the lake. So it's basically the amount of time when water enters into the lake, how long it stays within the lake before it leaves the outlet. And the retention time within the lake is less than a year. So as Rachel mentioned, that's good because the changes that we can make, the improvements that we can make, you should see a relatively quick improvement within the lake based on that retention time.
Thanks, Dave. Sorry to put you on the spot.
That's fine.
So looking at this data and trying to answer these questions, we came up with values to put into our model. And we'll give you the results of those shortly. But we modeled nutrient inputs from all the various components of the watershed to see, which factors are contributing the most amount of nutrient pollution and what would providing a solution like a wastewater management solution do. And then as Dave mentioned, we've sampled Lake Waccabuc, and we're going to be using those results to compare to what we have for the baseline for the model and make sure that the numbers that we're putting in make sense. So when looking at nutrient contributions from septic systems, there were 2 questions we had to answer for the model in terms of inputs. how many failing septic systems do we have, and how many poorly functioning septic systems do we have? So a failing septic system is typically identified as a septic system where the wastewater is actually coming to the surface or backing up into the home. Well, I guess I should, this image is kind of important. So for those of you who aren't a septic system nerd like me, you have your home with your septic tank that then drains into, for a conventional system, it goes to a drain field. You might also have something like a cesspool or a seepage pit, but generally it goes from the septic tank and then drains into the ground. So if for some reason the ground is getting plugged up, I know we talked at the last public information meeting about the importance of maintaining your septic system. So getting your septic tank pumped out regularly. If you don't do that, you can have some terrible stuff going out to your drain field and plugging it up. So that's one way that a septic failure can be caused. Another way is if the groundwater table rises up so high that the wastewater is nowhere to go, and then it comes to the surface. So those are two main causes for septic failures. So based on the data that we have of the number of reported septic failures from Westchester County Department of Health and from the public survey that we did in April, there is an average of 2 septic system failures per year. So that was the value that we put into the model. Again, this is just based on the data that we have. There might be more failing septic systems that we don't know about. Now, in looking at poorly functioning septic systems, that's a little trickier, because when you're looking at a poorly functioning system, you're looking at wastewater that's not being treated before it reaches a point of concern, like Lake Waccabuc or a stream that leads to Lake Waccabuc. So the two focuses that we honed in on were aging septic systems, and then septic systems that are on sites with environmental constraints. So with anything, there's always components of a system that have a limited lifetime. The limiting lifetime for a septic system are the components that have a life expectancy of 50 years. So generally speaking, that is the end of life of a septic system. Granted, if you properly maintain your septic system and you inspect it, it's certainly possible that it'll last beyond that. The US EPA stated that the average lifespan of a septic system is 15 to 40 years, but it can last longer if properly maintained. The Cornell Cooperative Extension stated that, in their opinion, septic systems are designed to have a useful life of 20 to 30 years under the best conditions. So obviously there's varying opinions out there, but based on these values, what we used for the model was any septic system that we believe to be 50 years or older, we're assuming is poorly functioning. And then any septic system that's 30 to 49 years old and we don't have records of regular pump outs, we're assuming is also poorly functioning. So these are the results in terms of the ages of the septic systems. In red, we have septic systems that were built before 1971. In yellow, it's 71 to 90. So those would be the 30 to 49-year-old septic systems. And then in green, those are the newer septic. The bright green is the newer septic systems. Light green are typically vacant parcels. I mean, yeah, or outside of the study area. So even if a parcel is bright green right now, when you think about it, at some point they're going to hit that 50-year mark. Septic systems aren't necessarily forever, so that's something that's important to keep in mind. You know, when we're looking at this study area, we're trying to think, what is the best thing that we can do to help with the nutrient pollution contributions to Lake Waccabuc? So even if you have a newer septic system, you know, replacing it, or I shouldn't say replacing it, but having sewer, say, come into your area wouldn't be the worst idea. So if we're looking at sites that have environmental constraints, things that we're thinking about are soils that drain too quickly or too slowly. Generally, the soils in the study area, we don't have that problem unless there's a wetland, and I really hope you're not in a wetland. But soils that drain too quickly means that the wastewater is reaching the groundwater table too quickly. So what's really treating your wastewater is the bacteria in the soil that's dry, the dry part of the soil above the groundwater table. So if you have soils that drain too quickly, wastewater doesn't get treated very well. If it drains too slowly, that tends to lead more so towards a failing septic system where the wastewater would come up to the surface. It really depends. I have not evaluated the wells in this study area. If you have a bedrock well, then it wouldn't necessarily be in the same aquifer. But if you have a shallow well, it could be. This image is for those of you who didn't hear the question, the question was, how deep is a well into the aquifer? So I was just explaining that wells can be at different depths, and at times they can be in a separate aquifer. And I'm assuming that question stems from the image here on this slide. So this image was taken from EPA. It's really to highlight this last bullet point of how cesspools and seepage pits are concerned. Because if you have a traditional leach field, which is what's shown to the left portion of the image, or not left, I'm sorry, right, the right portion of the image, notice how much more of a distance there is to the groundwater table. So there's way more space for bacteria to treat the wastewater. When you have a cesspool or seepage pit, you're putting a lot of wastewater into one very concentrated area that goes deeper into the ground. So there's less of an opportunity for the wastewater to be treated. We also looked at proximity of septic systems to water bodies and wetlands. So that goes back to if the wastewater gets to the groundwater before it's fully treated, there is still a little bit of treatment that happens in the groundwater. It's not nearly as much. So if your property is very close to a water body, it gives less time for additional treatment to happen. There's also a limited separation distance to obviously groundwater. I keep harping on that, and bedrock. If you have shallow bedrock and the wastewater gets to it before it's fully treated, there could be a fracture that could lead all the way to the lake. And so hitting, the groundwater moves very slowly. A bedrock fracture is just an opening. It's a gateway to take you wherever you want in a very short period of time. So that is a concern. And then the last thing is steep slopes. So the issue with steep slopes is if the wastewater can come out of the steep slope. Steep slopes give an opportunity for wastewater to surface. So based on the data that we had available to us, we decided that any septic system that we think is likely to not meet current health code standards, we're going to assume is poorly functioning for the sake of the model. So all the sites in red are what we estimate to not be able to meet health code standards, be it shallow bedrock, shallow groundwater, proximity to the water, what have you. So this is the combination of those two slides, the age and the environmental constraints. So red are what we feel are the highest priority. Those are the sites that have an environmental constraint. Those are issues that are kind of difficult to overcome. You have an aging septic system, but it's on a site that doesn't have environmental constraints. You could replace that septic system, and then you wouldn't have to worry about any nutrient pollution to Lake Waccabuc. So the whole reason we're doing this study is to find a solution to try to eliminate or at least mitigate contributions of septic systems to the lake. So for the wastewater management solutions, we looked at 4 types of solutions. We looked at just replacing the individual septic systems, connection to a community septic system, extending a sewer to an existing treatment plant, and then also creating a sewer with a new treatment plant. So for upgrades and replacements of existing septic systems, as I've mentioned, you can replace an old septic system, but if it's on a parcel that can't really support it. You know, let's say your parcel's too small and you can't meet setback requirements. So then there's concerns of too much wastewater concentrated in such a small area. One solution that we've come up with is adding an individual phosphorus treatment unit to your system. So it would go after your septic tank and before your drain fields. So this is an alternative that we're giving, because when it comes to talking about wastewater treatment plants and sewers, those costs can get high real fast. So this is a simple solution that we are evaluating so that we know that there's at least something that might be feasible. Connection to a community septic system. So in terms of available land in the area, because when you start getting too far away from the study area, cost really starts going up to send a pipe there. So we looked at a bunch of different parcels in the area. Unfortunately, most of the land that's vacant, it's vacant for a reason. Yes.
Where does phosphorus come from? Like, is it, so I'm assuming it's not human waste, but where is it coming from if we're concentrating on the septic system?
Dave, were you able to hear that question okay?
Oh, could you please repeat it, Rachel?
So there was a question from the audience, which is, where are the sources of phosphorus coming from? In terms of, you're talking about septic systems, right, and wastewater. So, I mean, yes, there is the soaps component, but at the same time, New York State has banned phosphorus from detergents. So, I mean, Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of it comes from the foods we eat, right?
Yeah, it's just primarily byproducts from the different things that are going through the septic system. And was the question just related to the septic input or the non-septic as well?
They probably both. I mean, we're obviously highlighting that phosphorus is the nutrient of concern. So I think the question is, one question is, well, how do we maybe not put it into the stream? You know, how do we keep it out?
So we'll touch base on that a little bit more in a second, right, Dave, when we're talking about the model and the inputs?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So in terms of a community septic system, if we were to create a large scale septic system to connect all the homes to it, it would need to be about 8 acres. So that's a very big septic system that we're talking about. We tried to look at doing smaller community systems for various parts of the study area, but the only land that really came up as a viable option is having a community septic system for the South Shore Waccabuc Association, which is actually something they've already looked into prior to this study. So that's something that we're further evaluating to get a better idea of cost and how that fits in with these other alternatives. So in terms of connecting to an existing wastewater treatment plant, the nearest municipal wastewater treatment plant is in Ridgefield, Connecticut. They recently just did an upgrade to their plant because they had 2 treatment plants. So they absorbed their smaller one into their larger one. Unfortunately, they're on a parcel that is very limited in size. So they don't have room to increase in capacity, nor are they looking to undergo another expansion anytime soon, even if they could. So apart from that, we have been evaluating other nearby wastewater treatment plants that are within a 10-mile radius, because that is unfortunately the distance that you have to start getting to in order to get to these larger treatment plants. And there are 2 wastewater treatment plants that are currently under consideration. The costs that go into connecting to a wastewater treatment plant, it might sound nice compared to building a new treatment plant, but what we're seeing is you have the cost to connect to the treatment plant, including building a long pipeline with big pump stations And then, you know, you have your annual sewer fees, and it all adds up pretty quick. So we're comparing that to a new treatment plant for that reason. They're both sizable costs. And when we're talking sizable costs, you know, replacing individual septic systems, that's in the single millions. When you're talking connecting to a nearby treatment plant or building one, we're talking in the tens of millions. So like for the South Shore Waccabuc Association, so that is in the single millions, low single millions. I don't want to be tied to a number until we finish them, but yes, yeah. Okay, so for a new wastewater treatment plant, we're estimating it would take, and again, we're finalizing our calculations, but it would take about half an acre to fit a treatment plant that could accommodate the entire study area. And that's just the footprint of the plant itself. There are setback requirements to a treatment plant. They have to be so far from property lines and homes. If we were to build a treatment plant, it would be completely covered. We would try to make it blend in with the neighborhood. There would be a complete HVAC system for the inside of the treatment plant. So in terms of concerns of having a treatment plant in your community, the whole idea would be to blend it in. Yes.
For a plant that size, for the type of treatment, you know, treatment technologies we're looking at, I would say, you know, the noise is not that bad actually. Probably the largest noise maker would be if the emergency generator actually was probably running for that.
So for those of you attending virtually, there was a question about noise from a wastewater treatment plant. And our answer is that the wastewater treatment plant at this size wouldn't have a substantial noise unless there was a power outage and the generator had to be turned on. So there are currently 2 sites under consideration for wastewater treatment plant. Again, the South Shore Waccabuc Associations, they have a corner of their property that is currently undeveloped. That would not be big enough to treat the entire study area. Another place that we're looking at is Lewisboro Elementary. So because that is a little ways out of the study area, what makes it more appealing is that we would be doing this project with the Truesdale Lake community. So as I mentioned earlier, they are also doing an engineering study of their lake. And so this could be a wastewater management solution that we merge together on. So that would help with the costs. Yes, it doesn't have to. That's fair. It does not have to. Oh, yes.
Question on that Lewisboro one, all of the homes that are surrounding the lake that would redirect over there, is that?
Right. So the idea is we would build a treatment plant where the existing vacant element, well, it's not truly vacant. The elementary school that's not being used as an elementary school. And that treatment plant would be specifically for this study area and potentially the Truesdale study area.
So that would cover the other houses that are surrounding the lake, not just the South Shore.
Right, exactly. Oh, so back to the South Shore Association. If we put a treatment plant there, now while I said it has limited capacity, I don't mean just to their association. We are looking at potentially doing the whole eastern part. Oh, I see what you did. The whole eastern part of the lake. So we're talking, you know, Old Pond Road, Cove Road, Lakeview Road, that area, in addition to the South Shore Association. That's one consideration. And we'll talk more about why with the phosphorus values from the model. So as you can see, oh.
Well, I mean, in terms of the sewer treatment, it would be, you know, taking the waste obviously from people's cottages or a house.
Right.
And then what the intent would be is everybody would have what's called a grind pump. Because the sewer wouldn't be able to get there by gravity. Yeah, so you would have a pump with a small diameter force main. And all of these areas would all be collected and pumped, for instance, to the elementary school, then for treatment. So that's why each lake is being studied, what the effects would be if it's a man-made lake or if it's a natural lake. But in terms of us treating the sewer being essentially generated by everybody in their houses, I don't know that it would affect that.
But then would not go into your groundwater?
So
Your aquifer?
the wastewater treatment plant. No, if we were to do a wastewater treatment plant at the South Shore Association, which as you can see is in the southeast corner of the study area, we would then discharge to Waccabuc River. So Waccabuc River is leaving the study area. It is where Lake Waccabuc discharges. Right. So if there was a treatment plant at the South Shore Association, so just to give you some numbers, the flow that we estimate for the entire study area is 140,000 gallons per day. If we were to do, say, just the eastern portion, and that's an example, they are very close. That would be a total of 70,000 gallons per day. 100,000 gallons per day in that treatment plant. So depending on how numbers come out, how people within the various communities feel, a number of factors to this treatment plant if this were the solution.
The South Shore treatment plant, that would be in addition to the Lewisboro Elementary?
Nope. These are looking for systems, we're giving phosphorus treatment. So we can combine these different
We'll call it a
pieces.
hybrid approach.
Yeah,
Where likely if everybody is not in, you know what I mean? Some people may decide based on the age or what they want to do with their own septic, they may not want to be in. Or the western side, particularly that northwest section, which is the longest way away, they may have their own solution. So it doesn't go there.
Two wastewater treatment plants are not being proposed simultaneously.
no, these are separate options. I just wanted to show you their locations with respect to the study area. So the wastewater treatment plant at Lewisboro Elementary, just to kind of speak back to what we were talking about earlier, that we think would also discharge to Waccabuc River. And the reason being, their existing wastewater treatment plant, it discharges to that tiny blue line you see at the bottom of the screen. And that stream is so small that at times it dries up. So we think that permitting a discharge there is unlikely. So we would go down Boughton Road. Am I saying the road name right? Okay, thank you. So we'd be going down Boughton Road and discharging the Waccabuc River at that point. And I don't know. Okay, can you see my mouse, Dave? Well, yeah, we've got two computers. So Dave, is that a yes?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, so it would be right here that we would connect to where Waccabuc River meets Boughton. So that's what we're looking into with that alternative.
Wait, there's a couple questions.
Yeah.
So that would be someone was asking where would we connect from South Shore Association to Waccabuc River. That's right here. If you can see my mouse. Dylan.
And those could change. I mean, it's so early in the study phase. Now we're trying to look at rough data like topography, property lines, what would make the most sense to get to a place for discharge, but it could easily change. Rachel, there's another question.
Yes.
I know the right red line very obviously does not include lakes, Riverwalk and Oskalita.
Yep.
But I'm assuming that there would also be a big red splotch if you had investigated those septic systems and a wastewater treatment plant. Like, would it be possible outside of your study later to connect a sewer line to the wastewater treatment plant? I guess maybe my question is, when you propose it, certainly South Shore would not be big enough to accommodate that also, but the Lewisboro, would that be big enough to incorporate additions?
That is the hope. That is one thing that we've been keeping in the back of our minds. While we aren't allowed to evaluate those sites to determine what flow would come from there or what have you, we have been keeping in the back of our minds, what would allow some kind of expansion or, be able to accommodate that capacity.
There's enough land up there ultimately.
Right. There is ultimately enough land at the elementary school.
Yeah, it seems like, this, I mean, we're all hoping this is successful. And as you said, they're
Hydraulically.
Right, all the same body.
Yeah.
So, it seems like it's in everybody's best interest if they also connect to that system. So it seems like if we're getting this far to think ahead to incorporate or to include acid.
Definitely. So because, as we're talking here, for those of you attending virtually, in case you didn't hear, we're talking about how Lake Rippewam and Oskalita, they're all connected through a stream system to Lake Waccabuc. So in terms of beyond this study, we certainly want to consider, whether or not we could connect them to a potential wastewater management solution. Yes. Yes, a DEP watershed.
Probably done it before. What about the impact of Mountain Lake Farm? Is a several lake that will flow down in our area.
So you said Mountain Lakes?
Mountain Lake Park, you're not there.
Mountain Lakes Park.
Are you aware that it's like a quarter-mile from where we are, running up into Martell? They don't have any septic.
The county park? Okay, so the county park, Dylan, can you point to it in the upper right corner? So the question was about the county park and you said that there's a lake there, Mountain Lake.
No, they don't have septic. Well, I don't know what they do.
It's really a question for Dave.
Yeah.
If that sewer, if that watershed drains down into this watershed,
Yeah.
what are the, basically what are the impacts?
So Dave, do you know if the Mountain Lakes or the Mountain Lake drains into Lake Rippewam?
I would have to double check, Rachel, but I would suspect that it would, but I would have to check back on the watershed boundaries for Rippewam. That question also came up in the chat. So before we go on, it would probably be a good time to take a look at the chat questions as well before we leave this section.
Okay. Okay, couldn't the use of advanced package systems allow for clustering on smaller available plots? And I think they're talking about packaged wastewater treatment plants.
We're talking about small ones or just cluster like 6 or 8 lots or something small.
Okay. I think from a cost perspective, that would likely be cost prohibited.
I mean, these are the types of things we're looking at right now is how do you hybrid some of this together? Could certain streets be put together with a on-site system and get several houses to it? We've done some preliminary evaluation looking at some of that.
In terms of land for such a package system, again, there's really a whole lot, there's not a whole lot of available land that's undeveloped that could be used for something like this. So, I mean, you could be talking about, you know, if there were people who live near each other and came to an agreement and maybe they have lots of available land on their properties, that might be a possibility, but that's not, we haven't gone knocking on homeowners' doors asking, are you willing to have a small treatment plant to accommodate a few homes in your neighborhood? Okay, what about building on Mountain Lake's property? We did look at putting a treatment plant or even a large scale septic system on the Mountain Lakes property. The problem is the elevation change is so substantial. You would need a very special sewer system to get the wastewater up there. Someone asked, what do the blue lines on the map represent? Those are the streams in the area. So one thing to keep in mind is if your property is not on Lake Waccabuc, you might be near a stream, and that stream feeds straight into Lake Waccabuc. Okay, so let's continue on.
All right, I'm going to give you a chance to
Wait,
catch your
one
breath,
sec.
Rachel.
One second, Dave, we got a question.
Okay.
So the question was about the Lewisboro Elementary site and what do we think in terms of talking to the Board of Education about us purchasing that property for this project with the concern that they will want to keep it. So the answer to that is, you know, the building it's getting old, it's got a lot of issues. It would cost a lot of money to bring that building to a good level. And so we feel that that makes it advantageous to come in and say, you know, we can buy this property, you know, and you wouldn't have to worry about upgrading it and all of those costs. Yes.
Follow-up question to that. Does putting a wastewater treatment plant at the site of Lewisboro Elementary exclude any other use of that property? Could it then not be used as a town office, or could it then never be used as a school again? I mean, what is the implication of putting a plant there?
So the treatment plant would take up a substantial portion of the site. So the idea would be it would just be for the treatment plant.
So the
Most
existing
likely.
offices there would have to be relocated.
Yes.
And so that entire plot would essentially only be forever a wastewater treatment plant.
That is the thought.
I just wanted to.
And some of it is just what we talked about between Truesdale, between the other two lakes, a part of the earlier discussion. Does that go there? And obviously, if it goes there, you know, the facility has to be a little larger. No, but you're right. The cost of
And a school? Oh, yeah, no.
Right, that's not what we're thinking. Right, so-
So moving on to the existing nutrient loads by source. Dave, I think we're ready for you.
All right, I'll give you a break for just one moment here. So Rachel's talked quite a bit about the modeling efforts that we're doing, and the modeling is through a program called Model My Watershed. It's a US EPA approved method to model impaired water bodies, specifically water bodies that may ultimately getting a total maximum daily waste load allocation assigned to them. So what this model did, we looked at all the different land uses, cover types, and the model generates nutrient loading, nitrogen, phosphorus, and also sediment loading from external sources to the lake. So external sources within the watershed. The lake itself also has internal loadings for phosphorus and nitrogen, and we'll be addressing those in the report. But for the sake of tonight's discussion, we're looking at the external sources. And the results of the modeling, based on the inputs that Rachel mentioned, with the failing systems and the poorly functioning septic systems, we really found that the main driver for the phosphorus loads into the lake are from the septic systems. So the septic systems account for upwards of 80% of the nutrient loading into the lake. And again, the whole focus, the driver of this study was really to look at the septic system issues. The model also allows us to look at the other watershed issues from stormwater runoff. But again, the real driver here is that the septic is the biggest source of the nutrient loading to the lake.
What about, is that also contribute to the phosphorus? There are things for autoimmune disorders, psychiatric disorders, cancer, all of that is going into the septic. And all of that is feeding into, and my question is that having an impact as well? I mean, I have to imagine, I know it is freshwater. I have to imagine that it has some, outside from the septic not being functional.
Let me repeat the question first. So the question from the audience is, people who are taking medication, that ends up in the wastewater and the groundwater and in the whole cycle, the whole water cycle. So is any of the phosphorus coming from these medications?
In phosphorus lines, I will say, big picture, for municipal sewer systems, two of the biggest issues in the last several years that have really been coming up, are kind of on two ends. One is medication and what that all means to the system. And then the other is actually baby wipes that everybody puts down the toilets. You know what I mean? And then that clogs everything. So it's got different issues, but those are the biggest things. But that's one of the things industry-wide, everybody's really trying to test more. It really is somewhat in its infancy, really trying to understand what is happening with all the with medicine and the effects to the sewer system, but then what it means to groundwater, lakes. I mean, we won't be that deep in this study as to exactly what it means, but there's no doubt industry-wide that is becoming a major concern.
Dave, were you able to hear that response okay?
Yes.
Okay. So these are the modeling results with the various alternatives. So if we were to just replace everybody's septic systems with no additional treatment, we anticipate it would only remove 15% of the phosphorus. If we were to add phosphorus treatment to all the septic systems, we think that would remove 81% of the phosphorus. If we just did a community system at South Shore Association, it would be just those 30 homes, that itself would remove 6% of the phosphorus. If you paired that with everybody else having their septic systems replaced and phosphorus treatment added for those homes that have limited environmental constraints or environmental constraint limitations, there we go. Again, we think that would remove 81%. Now, the last 4 bars you're looking at are sort of a cumulative, what would happen if we include more and more of the study area in a wastewater management solution that involves connecting to a treatment plant, be it a nearby treatment plant or building a new one. So if we just did the east end, as we were talking about earlier, that would be 54% of the phosphorus. If we added in the middle region with Perch Bay and basically anything that's north of the golf course but south of the lake, that in total would be 69%. If we added in the northwest corner, so it would be the whole north portion of the study area, anything north of the golf course, that'd be 78%. And then if you do the entire study area, so you bring in that southern region, it would be 81%. So as you can see, just targeting that eastern portion of the study area makes a substantial difference on its own. Yes.
I guess I have a question, and I think it was pertaining to the slide before, pertaining to the watershed modeling. But right here is the golf course. And I hope I don't want to tread lightly, but obviously, like this ground looks great. And so I'm assuming that there are a lot of nutrients put directly on the ground to make it look great. What, if any, effect or how is that model we're taking into account here?
So I did talk to the Waccabuc Country Club about their use of fertilizers and pesticides. In New York State, generally speaking, you're not supposed to use any phosphorus in those in fertilizers and such, unless if it's new growth. You're allowed to do it for a short period of time. And Waccabuc Country Club follows all of those protocols. So their fertilizers don't have phosphorus in them. I'm assuming they do have nitrogen, but that's not the concern for this study, which we did add the nitrogen input to the model. So we do have those numbers. Yes.
So, talking about potentially trying to trap the phosphorus without. What you're saying, what you're saying is like, if we did that, at best, we would trap 8% is still going to come from that one.
Yeah. So those are the numbers we would remove. So with these various solutions, we can remove 81%.
That doesn't, the alum would stop the phosphorus from coming up the bottom. Well, what percentage of that phosphorus is what we're dealing with?
Oh, no, go forward one. Or forward one. Yes. Yes.
I think that the question, ratio of phosphorus and the septic system versus phosphorus present in the groundwater that we might be able to. Is the septic phosphorus 81%?
So this takes into account anything from a septic system, be it a surface failure or a subsurface failure.
So I believe,
Yes. 80% of that from septic.
yeah, so basically, if you go to
Not
the
the
other
problem.
slide, Dylan.
Yeah, go back.
And I'm gonna come over here. Sorry. This is the total phosphorus in pounds in the model. It's 490.9. Let's call it 500, right? That's close down. The red box is septic systems. It's 398. Call it 400. The total is 500. 80% comes from septics. It's 400. 81% if you fix all the septics. Call it 80% reduction in phosphorus. So it would be, I believe, 80% reduction
Yes.
of the 400. So follow that. So that's 320 out of 500. So you would essentially in the entire system, and Dave can confirm this, it would go down 64% total based on this model of what it's saying. Do those numbers make sense? That makes sense?
I thought the number was 80.
Well, but the question is, and I need Dave to answer this because he ran the model.
Yep.
Are we reducing, what the question is are we reducing 80% of the total phosphorus or 80% of the phosphorus from the septic system?
No, it's Don, it's the former. It's 80% of the total phosphorus. I mean, that's why, if you were to sewer the entire study area, you're eliminating all of the phosphorus load from the septic systems. So those bars on the following slide are total phosphorus.
It is total phosphorus. It's
Yes.
not just with the septic. My bad.
I know we talked about.
So the remaining, the delta there, the remaining balance is from the watershed sources, the stormwater runoff.
But I think one thing we would have to keep in mind is with what, and that makes sense, Dave, because what we're saying is we're taking all the phosphorus out of the septics, putting it into a municipal solution. That also means everybody goes to that in that water, right? I mean, literally every single house, so.
That's right.
I know we talked about.
Yep.
And that's cool.
We have a question.
But I know in my area, there are a lot of people who want to and they live on hilltops.
Mhm.
And they have, and they fertilize, herbicide, and all of that. Are there restrictions on the phosphorus on those areas? Those areas are gonna go right into the water.
If those chemicals are purchased within New York State, they don't have phosphorus. Now, granted, we are near the Connecticut border, so I don't know if anybody's buying their products across the state line. Yes, Paul?
I asked over there, I tried buying some phosphorus fertilizer to see what would happen. And Scott and outfits like that, because of the New York State ban, they won't sell phosphorus fertilizers in the western part of Connecticut. So that offers some protection.
Oh, great, great. So,
I'm sorry, what? Herbicides.
Dave, do you know if the phosphorus ban is also from herbicides?
I would have to confirm that, Rachel. I know it's was primarily driven for detergents and or for fertilizers.
So for those of you virtually, in case you didn't hear the question was about residents who use fertilizers and pesticides on the lawn. And we don't view that as a huge concern because there is a phosphorus ban from those products in New York State. As I mentioned, we are close to the Connecticut border, but as Paul Lewis just told us, he went over to some places just over the Connecticut border, and they try to honor that ban to try to protect the phosphorus contributions to New York State in Western Connecticut. So we don't view that as a huge contributor for this study. Okay, so the funding piece. One of the main purposes of this study is that when all is said and done, we'll be able to submit this study for potential funding for these different alternatives. How much funding we're going to be able to get, we're not entirely sure. A lot of these programs are more so towards a municipal solution. So that would be if we put in a treatment plant or a sewer to a treatment plant. If we were to replace septic systems, that would be a different animal. And we're going to try to see what we can do in terms of that from a global perspective. But one thing that is currently available is the east of Hudson. They have a septic system replacement and/or repair program. If you have a property that's highlighted in green on this map, that means you're within 200 feet of Lake Waccabuc, well, any water body really, within this DEP watershed that has this program. So that includes the lakes, the streams, the ponds, the wetlands. So if you are within that green area, you can reach out to the program. Now, the first step would be getting your septic system inspected. If the inspection shows that you do need a repair or replacement, then depending on your financial eligibility, they will fund up to 75% of your costs. But you have to meet financial eligibility criteria. So if you do have a failing septic system or you suspect you have a failing septic system, this is something to certainly keep in mind right now, because this study, if we move forward with one of these alternatives, it's still going to take years before it's implemented. So if you have a problem now and you are in one of these green highlighted areas, this is definitely a program to look into. So that's an East of Hudson program. We'll make sure to add a link to this on our website. Yes.
Probably know some people don't. They have.
Yes.
Is that included in this?
So we accounted for that in the model, that they are not currently phosphorus contributors. We are assuming that if they are within an area that we are bringing sewer to, that they would be part of the sewer district. You can't exclude homes in a sewer district. So once, we pick an alternative and we move forward with that, there would be a determination of, okay, where do we want this sewer district to be? You can opt out of connecting to the sewer, but you would still have to pay a fee for being in the sewer district. Did that answer your whole question?
Or did you mean about the funding?
No.
Does it include, you mentioned septic, are holding tanks included in that 75%?
I don't know.
Any monies?
I don't know. That is a very good question. So you mean if it needed to be repaired or replaced?
Right, if it's crap, it's leaking, it's going into the lake.
Sure.
Yeah. I will find that out and I will make sure to, if you want me to reach out to you directly, you can give me your contact information at the end.
Because South Shore has a number of people that hold.
Yes, yes, they do. And I will make sure to post this information on the website as well. Yes.
The whole department has been with this before. I know somebody sells it. This health department gets wrong. I think, they have requirements about septic. But does the health department get involved in this at all? I know there's math. Very good. And I looked at it. As to where the septic, how long people have gone without pumping their septic system. But does the health department have any? I mean, I would think if they would want to keep this, I mean, this is a watershed, and it's important.
So the question is, what would Westchester County Department of Health's involvement be in this project? Up to this point, their involvement has been supplying us with data. In terms of the next stage, they would be involved in the permitting piece. So they would.
Which is money making.
Right.
But you're right, whether it's a septic system that we were talking about as one of the earlier options, whether it's a municipal option, they have regulatory.
Are they telling individuals, you have to do this? You have to come here, let's say, every 2 to 3 years, or every 5 years. But I don't think there are any limitations, are there? I know somebody who just been dragged about 10 years, living in the lake, that was like.
I mean, they're not going around house to house enforcing.
Yeah, no.
I mean, I guess what I would say is they have guidelines, they put out expectations, but by no means is the health department going to everybody's house, knocking door to door, saying, show me, did you pump? You know what I mean?
And they're only just recently going to pumping people to find out. They're only just now letting you get the grant.
Right.
So they shouldn't charge us for them.
Rachel, can you hear us?
Yeah, right there.
So the question from the audience is, did we sample at the inlet from the stream into Lake Waccabuc? Dave, can you, then my mouse disappeared.
Yes,
You can
yes,
see
we
my
did.
mouse?
Yes, sorry, we lost audio remotely. At least I did for 30 seconds or so. But yes, we did sample that. Very close to the inlet. We not right at it due to the vegetation that was in there, but very close to that. And we're waiting for those results from the lab.
The retention period for the custody. I know it's not extended.
Dave, do you know the retention time of Lake Oskalita?
I can get it for you in a moment.
Okay.
And what my point is if they're cranking out phosphorus and the retention time is very low. It's just pushing the Waccabuc first. Right, so if their phosphorus flows into Waccabuc very quickly,
Okay, so the comment is just. We're
I mean, I
getting,
think everybody knows and understands with the two lakes, discharging into this lake. It was a very early discussion, as the town knows about what can we study beyond. It was a little bit to your discussion about the watershed. What can we look at the two lakes? We didn't determine the red line. The red line was determined by the DEP
and DEC.
and DEC to fund this study. So we didn't dictate it and say, let's only do that. We said, it makes a lot of sense to expand it. And the answer was, you are not allowed.
Very much wanted to. The town very much wanted to expand it.
Yep.
We were given a flat no by New
Yes.
I probably know the answer to this. The homeowners have an obligation to keep their septic updated in any way.
So there is a new rule that you do have to pump out your septic tank every 5 years, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and that started, I think, 2016.
Well, I was just gonna say, I don't know if I should say it this way, but I will. We're also obligated, we should drive 55 miles an hour in and 55 mile an hour zone. I mean, it's a little bit of self-policing, if you will. Do you have it? As we said earlier, when the question was about the health department. The health department's not coming, knocking door to door, saying, show me, did you pump it out? So is there an obligation? There is. But it's really I would call it self-enforced until there's a problem. I mean, really, that's really what, and that's the surface.
Okay. So what comes next? So this, the draft version of it. Okay, one more question.
Doesn't even know that certain homes have a septic system put in for a certain year. And they have no literature at all.
Yes,
There's no way they're checking or enforcing any rules.
that is a fair comment.
Do you know, based on me knowing that, do you know the percentage of homes in the study area that the Department of Health doesn't have any information on?
I do
they
not.
gave me
Yes.
data.
So what
How
they
much
gave
data was
me,
missing is on-
they gave me the easily obtainable data. So they keep track of when septic tanks are pumped out, but unfortunately, that is based off of who is pumping out your septic tank. So if you hire someone to do it who's outside of Westchester County or outside of the state, they are not reporting it to Westchester County. So that information, or yeah, they don't have to. So that information is unknown. So they know who is pumping it out based on the ones that are reported. They know who is repairing their septic systems as those are being reported by a licensed septic installer in the area. They actually don't technically keep track of failures in the sense of there's a note that the septic repairs or replacements were due to a failure. It's the assumption that who would pay all that money to repair or replace their septic system unless there is a failure. Yes. Do you still have a question? No.
I was just gonna say, with that in mind, the data should show a larger net phosphorus loading. Is that, am I understanding that correct? Your model did not include people, septic systems that weren't reported with the Department of Health. So
Right.
if it wasn't reported, then the numbers on your model are lower than actual.
So he's talking about actual surface failures that might not have been reported. So yes, in that case, the numbers could be higher.
So in other words, like, I guess what I'm saying is the sewer system is actually, like, this proposal should actually be rosier than what you're data suggests, or like the
Rosier, as in less.
potential phosphorus loading currently is worse than you're showing. Could be.
It could be.
Could be.
There's a lot of variables. We did our best to try to come up with what we think is happening.
And then we're trying to truth it with the field sampling that we
Yes.
took, and we're waiting for the lab samples back. To then compare that to the model to say, how close is the model compared to, now it's sampling over 2 days also, right? Yeah.
Right. Right. And back to the question of what the data is available at Westchester County Department of Health. When we requested information on individual septic systems, those are all hard copy documents. Dylan, correct me if I'm wrong, you did the most of the communication with them, but they did make a comment that a lot of the homes don't even have documentation, or they made that assumption. So that is something that we have also heard. Yes.
So is there a way, just to know, based on all the homes in the study, how many homes are missing?
So when we talked to the health department, about obtaining that information, the hard copy information, they said it would take 4 months. This study started in, yeah. And this study started in January. And I don't remember at what point we talked to them. It was early on in the year that we talked to them. We said, to be able to use this data and analyze it, that's not enough time for us to be able to incorporate into the report. So we did not pursue that further. So theoretically, somebody at the county could go through and see what's available, but we have not done that as part of the study.
And I guess it's could go well. Association could be down to them.
Yeah, any person can request a copy of the information on your septic system. When I bought my home, actually before I bought my home, the house I wanted to buy, I went to the health department and I asked for a copy. And it was pretty sad what they had available, but they did have something, so I guess they shouldn't complain. I'm not in the study area, but you are more than welcome to go to the Westchester County Department of Health and request that information to have it for your own knowledge.
I know this is part of Waccabuc. Is there a way to cordon off that area, just for a short period of time, to evaluate the water quality coming from the site? Say, okay, we've got to meet proper standards. Is that doable?
So Dave, this is sort of your question. I'll chime in a little bit, but the question is there any way to, separate out South Shore Association and sort of keep wastewater, keep wastewater contributions from happening in that area, to see whether or not that would affect the phosphorus contributions to the lake or the effects on the lake? My answer to that is that would be asking a lot of the South Shore Association. But Dave, what we did with sampling was we were trying to figure out where certain levels are higher in the lake, right? That's why we picked those spots.
That's right, to get a good, cross section within the lake. And that is something we could parse out of the model, as well as to look at different inputs from the different areas within the lake.
Right. So, one of the things that could come next is evaluating people's septic systems and seeing where they're at. And, that's just part of a conversation after we see the results and the direction we want to go in and that sort of thing. So there's a lot that's going to come after this study. So let's just try to get through. I think we only have like 2 or 3 slides, and then we'll answer more questions, okay? So this report is due August 13th for review by DEP and NUIPIC. NUIPIC is an organization that is administering the funding and they're doing a lot of the paperwork for DEP. The final engineering report is due December 1st. So what's going to happen is we're putting together this report. They're going to review it. They're going to come back to us with comments. We're going to finalize it. And then the final report will be submitted in December. In between that time, since we don't have final costs for you yet or the sample data, we anticipate having another public outreach meeting to be able to discuss those results when the report is finalized. Oh, and the report will be posted to the website. So it's due August 13th. Once it's completed, it will be posted to the website. You'll be able to look at it yourself. You'll be able to post comments. Right now, my contact information's on there if you have any questions or comments on the report. And we'll have more information for you at the next public information meeting. Okay.
And we're like, I don't have to go to that, so I'm going to the meeting next week. What are you talking about?
Okay. Okay. There was a comment from the audience that because my email address doesn't say Lake Waccabuc in it or anything to that effect, that some people may have missed my emails. So we'll see what we can do about making sure that we're reaching everybody. So how you can help. We're doing another survey. We want your input. We want to know how you feel about this project and what's coming next. So if you could go to the project website, we're going to have the survey posted starting tomorrow morning. The project website is lakewaccabucstudy.com. In some cases, computers, for some reason, don't always accept just typing in lakewaccabucstudy.com. If you have trouble with it not coming through, type in that https:// and it will definitely come up, I promise. Once you're there, go to the public outreach tab, and that's where you'll find the link to the survey. I will also send it around via email. So if you've been getting emails from me, you will get it that way as well. Yes, the report will be posted on this website. There's a wealth of information on this website. If you haven't already looked at it, it has all this, that CSLAP data, the sample data that Dave was talking about. It's got our monthly progress meeting minutes with the town. There's the recording from the previous public information we had, that public information meeting we had in April. It will have the recording from this one. There's the Q&A from the last public information meeting is also posted on the website. And again, we'll have links. We'll have a link to this survey posted on the website as well. And my contact information is there if you have any questions for me. Again, I'm Rachel Schnabel. So the survey will be available for about a week. It will close at the end of the day, August 4th. So if you could fill out that survey by that time, we'd greatly appreciate it. And then just to recap, why this is so important. Restoring water quality of Lake Waccabuc will protect and repair the ecosystem of the lake. It will allow for continued safe recreational use of the lake. It will protect / improve the value of properties in the study area, and it will protect drinking water for residents in the study area. Okay. Are there any more questions on the floor? Okay. For those of you virtual, there were several hands that were raised. Okay, yes.
Would also the runoff drains, stormwater drains, does that get treated at them? Where does that come?
It goes to the lake.
Goes to
doesn't
the
it?
lake.
So the question is,
Is that ever decided?
No, I mean, no, that's been the opposite of what we want. What used to happen back,
Wait. Let's say what the question was so people know what's going on first. So the question was, if we pick an alternative where there is a sewer solution, would the storm drains get connected to the sewer? And the answer is no. And the other question was, where do they drain now? And unfortunately, the answer is Lake Waccabuc.
So, I mean, what used to happen decades ago, particularly in high urban areas, cities, is they call it a combined sewer system because the storm drain and the sanitary was combined in it. That's been the effort to eliminate that, take the storm water away. So right now, ultimately, in most of these cases, I would assume it's going down into the lake. That was the second area that when we talked with the DEP about what level we would study that to as part of this study for maybe some solutions. And the answer was the focus is the sanitary, the septics. We were allowed to put some inputs, Dave, into the model, but not really get into the evaluation of how to handle that.
So Lewis, the question is, have percolation tests been done at Lewisboro Elementary to see if the soil is viable? So if we do a treatment plant at Lewisboro Elementary, it would be a surface discharge treatment plant. So that would be discharging to Waccabuc River. We would not be discharging to the soils. So therefore, we are not concerned with the percolation rates. Yes.
I know we've got this environmental. Smoke that is coming from the west, affecting any of what is happening. I find it unusual that for a large lake has had such a problem, whereas a smaller lake is not at quite the extent of the problem, and it's complained of that. And I'm wondering if there has been smoke is absolutely fine. If I understand that it's not, it's smoke from the west. Does that have an impact on all or on the value?
So the question is the smoke coming from the west a contributing factor or a concern for pollution into Lake Waccabuc? Dave, do you want to take that question?
I would say it would be de minimis. I mean, there could be some deposition, but for the sake of this study, that would be de minimis.
Yes.
This idea of a water treatment facility for our area, this area, a real possibility?
Yes, sure. If you rely purely on the rest of the town, the answer is no.
My own comment is I learned a tremendous amount tonight in terms of what the septic is causing, because we've been led to believe that potentially it's really more of the phosphorus coming up from the bottom of the lake that's impacting it. Whereas it appears that, climate change, all kinds of things could be happening, but a portion of the phosphorus.
Yes. Some people.
Extensive filtering system. But right now, I don't know what to do. It's not quite bad. And so I know we are not talking cyanobacteria. We are talking I would recommend that no one goes to that water. I don't even know what's coming off that, off the top of the water, that might be infiltrated down. You know, is that possible? Yeah. I would, but it might be.
Dave, with harmful algae blooms where you have the toxins coming out of the algae, is that a concern for the air above the lake? I would think that the air would be able to dilute it enough. It depends on how close you are to it, right?
Yeah, I would defer to the health department on that, but I mean, certainly, you know, you want to avoid contact with it, obviously drinking it. As far as, you know, breathing the air directly above it, I think I'd have to look a little bit more into that.
Yes, there are people. Yes, there are people on the lake who draw water from Lake Waccabuc, and they have substantial treatment systems as a result to treat the water. Oh, wow. Implemented. So that would be like the Peach Lake community.
Well, I mean, I would tell you within the New York City watershed, particularly on the west of Hudson side, there was a program years ago about, you know, essentially cleaning up, you know, the watershed as best as possible, because obviously the water from the BP down in New York City is unfiltered. So I know a lot of lakes and areas over there went through what I would call similar studies years ago that eventually led into implementation. One of the early slides that was here talked about the money coming from New EPEC through DEP. I don't know if you have to see the slide.
Like the first.
In this round, 8 lakes were studied. Okay, so it was one community had 4 lakes, Lewisboro has 3, and a third community has 1 lake. So it's starting obviously with the study. Consultants have been selected for all of them to work on it. Yeah, that's the slide. So so basically DEP announced $3 million in planning grants for 8 lakes. Ultimately, they're going to look, you know, they're going to study these, and we're going to obviously try to look for funding. Is the DEP a potential source? Time will tell. I mean, they put money towards, you know, essentially cleaning up the watershed as best they can, obviously. So will it be here? I mean, it kind of depends on the results of the study for each lake and whether they feel they want to move into implementation. There's other sources we've looked at. You know, one of the interesting things is, you know, ultimately the solution of on-site individual will likely be a cheaper capital cost compared to collecting it all, pumping it all, piping it all to a new treatment plant. But at the same time, more money is available for those municipal solutions to do that. So that's part of what we have to weigh ultimately is, you know, where does the rubber meet the road on the funding? Potentially. Yeah, I mean, like it said earlier, you can replace them. They're not cheap to replace. A concern is, and that's why she talked about that East of Hudson program, is finding money, you know what I mean, having available funding source compared to you yourself just having to essentially pay for it.
One thing to consider with, you know, a treatment plant option is that, you know, there are components of a treatment plant that also have a life expectancy, and those components need to be replaced. And so at some point, that's going to be another cost. So when we're looking at a cost breakdown, you know, for building a new wastewater treatment plant, we are looking at getting grant funding, sure, but also low interest loans. So we're breaking down that cost over 30 years. And we're expecting that at the end of that 30 years, there's going to be more costs that you have to account for down the road. So it would just be a continued cost. So you have to put everything in a perspective. Sure, you replace your septic system once, got to replace it again in 50 years. But a wastewater treatment plant and the sewer collection system, those will all have components that need to be kept up as well. Yes.
What do you think? Are the odds of next summer being exactly like this summer?
That information you would have on the screen.
Dave, did you hear that question?
No, could you repeat it, please, Rachel?
Has Lake Waccabuc reached a tipping point in the phosphorus loading?
I mean, I guess all I could say is, Dave, my question is based on the CLAT, on the data collected to date, the CLAT program, where are we seeing I mean, the trend is it's getting worse. But
That's
I
correct.
haven't seen a line about how much worse, I guess, is kind of the.
One of the things to keep in mind is that with the pandemic, more people were staying home. And, maybe people were staying in seasonal homes instead of their normal homes. And so that certainly plays a role in adding more phosphorus to the lake. The question is that going to continue? Are people going to continue to use those homes more? Maybe. We don't know the answer to that. Dave, do you have anything more you want to add?
No, there definitely is an increasing trend in the phosphorus levels. There's a trend of the water clarity is decreasing. So again, the lake right now is kind of in this mid-level, this mesotrophic state, and it is trending to go to the next level of degradation, if you will, which is eutrophic status. So at the very bottom, you can see the levels of phosphorus. They are definitely going up. And just to clarify, clean up a couple of the prior questions, as far as the cyanotoxins, the CDC does consider inhalation as a potential pathway for the toxins. It's primarily driven off the mist from the water, but there also can be evaporation potentially. There's got to be more studies done with that. But if you do have the blue-green algae, obviously you want to avoid that. And I would be cognizant of breathing directly above that as well. And just one other question about the retention times. Asalita has a retention time of about 8.5 months compared to Waccabuc, which is about 11 months.
Dave, can you explain what retention time is briefly?
Yeah, again, the retention time is the amount of time that the water stays within the lake. So if you consider a raindrop or runoff into the lake, it's the amount of time it takes for the lake to flush that out. So it's definitely looked at on a average level, but on average, water that enters Asalita stays in the lake for 8.5 months, and the water that enters Lake Waccabuc is about 11 months.
Okay, let's take some of these virtual comments that we haven't answered yet. I have an on-site peat moss system for my house. Can that be a suggestion for neighbors to join together to have? I have to admit, I have not heard of an on-site peat moss system, but I can certainly look more into that. What is sediment and what does it do to the water quality?
Sediment is, in simplest terms, dirt. So it can be dirt from agricultural activities, construction activities, roadside drainage ditches, stream bank erosion. So as that dirt moves and gets into a water body, it can make the water body more cloudy or turbid. and it can prevent the sunlight from penetrating into the lake, and it can have effects on the vegetation within the lake, the ecosystems within the lake. And also is that sediment or dirt moves a lot of these nutrients that we're concerned about, phosphorus, other potential pollutants, they cling on to the dirt. So the dirt, the sediment is kind of one of the mechanisms that those nutrients can mobilize and get into the lake.
And I see one comment that where we used to live, you had to prove the septic was serviced. So I suppose that's a consideration. Moving forward, you know, having proof that's being regularly serviced. Are there any other questions in the room? Yep.
You talked about the South Shore, being about 6% of the correction. From the cost benefit ratio, would that be more than 6% of the money spent, or would it be less than the money spent? And I don't expect an answer because it's too early to do a cost benefit analysis, but I think it's probably something we should think.
Sure. So the question was about doing a cost benefit analysis. And in particular, the question was directed at South Shore Association and how if there was a community system there, it would remove 6% of the phosphorus, but compared to the cost of that alternative, you know, what does that ultimately mean? So that's something we can take into consideration in the report and include so you guys can all see that information.
We usually do. I mean, one of those bars was 54% on mostly the east side. It's the same idea, because the real cost isn't so much in the treatment. If you got to build a treatment plant and you're going to build a 70 or a 90 or a 140, it's not major differences because you got to be there and build it all anyways. But it's where all the piping goes. And the longer that piping is, the more money that adds. So that's why one idea we've been still looking at is that whole idea of on that South Shore, if you can get 100,000, that may be a cost benefit point. Well, yeah, and if it's there and it's not up at the elementary school, you're not demoing everything. And with the one concern, I think with the cost on demoing that building is the environmental concerns of that building.
Right, it's an old building. Yeah.
Yeah.
Rachel, I'd like to thank you for putting this on.
Let's start with that.
Okay, so I'll take all the credit.
When I would get a little bit fed up. So thank you, Rich. And if you want this to happen on Lake Waccabuc, support it and help. If you don't want it to happen, just withdraw into the back. Thanks.
All right. Thanks all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.